Have you ever been part of or listened to a podcast that was able to share with you some really critical and important information, even address aspirations in multiple areas of your life, but it didn't quite answer your specific question? Well, the Journey Boldly podcast will do just that. Our content comes from your questions. So if you're interested in presenting a question that you would like to hear the answer on the Journey Boldly podcast, just send it to Dr. Gwen at journeyboldlypodcast.com, and we will take your question, do the research, share my experiences, and answer your question. So let's jump into the question that we have for this particular podcast. This is our inaugural episode, and I received this question from an administrator because our primary focus is on women in higher education and the challenges they face in leading in today's unprecedented environment where cultural norms are shifting, expectations are changing, and external forces are making it even more difficult to lead. We often feel like we're on a hamster wheel or that we're playing whack-a-mole, putting out fires, and all the challenges that's coming with unprecedented times. So let's get started. The question that I received for this podcast is actually a three-part question, and I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to break it up into the three questions in order to provide a response. The question reads like this: what unique challenges do African American women in higher education face when seeking mentorship? How does that lack of access to mentors impact their ability to advance into leadership roles in academia? And what advice would you give to women who feel isolated in their academic journey and don't know where to start to find a mentor? As I mentioned, this one question is actually three questions, and I'm going to address them separately. And I'm going to use my 30 years of experience in higher education, 17 years as a business owner who conducts evaluations with colleges and universities across the country. And I've learned a lot about what works in higher education and what has not worked. Let's start with the first question. What unique challenges do African American women in higher education face when seeking mentorship? Of all the many unique challenges women face, I have identified three. Before I share those three with you, I want to start with a premise. The premise is African American women tend to mentor other African American women more effectively. Now, that doesn't mean African American women can only be mentored by African American women, but due to their shared lived experiences, the mentoring process tends to be more effective when they mentor each other. But starting with that premise, let's look at these three areas that I believe are most powerful and prevalent among the unique challenges that they face. The first, you guessed it, availability. If they're not there, then it's hard for them to actually be mentors. Let's just look a little bit at the research. I want to start with an article written by Dr. Hazel Jack, who is Vice President for University Outreach and Chief of Staff at Colgate University. She wrote an article entitled Profile of Black Women Presidents at Four-Year Colleges and Universities, and it was published in fall 2023 in the Journal of Research on the College President. In her findings, she shared that of the 2,616 four-year institutions in this particular study, there were 83 Black women college presidents. Of those 83, 45 came through the academic pipeline, such as provost, vice president of academic affairs, or dean. Additionally, 20 of them came through other higher education administrative tracks, such as Vice President of Enrollment Management, Vice President of Student Affairs, or those positions. And 10 came from outside of higher ed, and the remainder of them were other types of presidents. So as you can see, because fewer women are ascending through the ranks of leadership, and if we stick with the premise that African American women tend to mentor other African American women, then we can see that availability is one of the unique challenges that they face. A second unique challenge that African Americans face is accessibility. And I look at this from the perspective of discipline diffusion. And that means that if fewer African American women are taking on positions in the academy, then they're dispersed across the 4,000 institutions of the academy. So having access to them can be extremely difficult. And so accessibility is one of the biggest challenges that I see with African American women being able to find a mentor. The last one I will mention is affinity bias. Julie Kratz, who's professor at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University, defines affinity bias as a tendency to favor people who share similar interests, backgrounds, and experiences with us. So just off the bat, you can see the challenge with that. But a little more information shows that in any given moment, we receive 11 million bits of information, but the brain can only process 40. So with that huge gap between information that's provided and the ability to make sense of it, affinity bias speeds up that process and saves time. So affinity bias automatically positions us to be less likely to find a mentor who looks like us, similar to us, and have similar backgrounds and our shared experiences. In addition to this, affinity bias has a neurological connection called cognitive bias, also known as unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is not always led by intentional omission, but it is led more by a gravitation toward that which is familiar. Our brain considers change as a threat to safety. So whenever we encounter someone or something that is different, affinity bias, unconscious bias, encourages us to lean toward that which is safer to deal with. In looking at affinity bias, we can say that affinity bias can sometimes be safer. It's less of a threat, and it's easier to acquiesce. Another thing that makes affinity bias safer. Now, before I keep going, I am not affirming that affinity bias is okay. It is what happens. It's a reality, and it's important to address it. Affinity bias can be safer also because if you are familiar with people and you're familiar with their shared lived experiences, it's easier to communicate with them. You're less likely to step on some type of landmine that lands you in HR or in a lawsuit because you didn't realize you were or were not supposed to say certain things. So affinity bias can be safer for multiple reasons. Another thing affinity bias does, it allows us to work with people we like. It allows us to gravitate to people we don't have to figure out what to say. We don't have to figure out if what we're saying is going to matter, if it's going to have meaning, if it's going to make a difference, or if it's going to be relevant. When we are attracted to or gravitate toward people who are easier to talk to because they appear to have shared lived experiences, it makes it much easier to communicate with them. And so this becomes another area in which African American women can find themselves experiencing a unique challenge. The second question is, how does the lack of access to mentors impact their ability to advance to leadership roles within the academy? I want to share with you a personal experience that I had while working as a graduate faculty member at a Research One university. I want to start by saying that even though I had an experience that did not help me become successful as a tenured faculty, I did not get tenure, but there were three key things, or I would say, that affected the environment in which I found myself that had a direct impact on my lack of success. This is not to blame anybody for it. It was just there. Number one, the university and the college specifically brought in 10 new graduate programs without changing the infrastructure for support. What does that mean? The college was accustomed to having graduate teaching assistants. Well, if you're bringing in graduate programs, there are no undergraduate programs to accommodate that. So the teaching assistants aren't needed. What we needed was research assistants. Now, we did have a 2-2 teaching load, which meant we taught 2 classes in the fall and 2 classes in the spring. And the typical teaching load is 4-4, where you teach 4 in the fall and 4 in the spring. So we were given 2 course releases off the bat. So that was an opportunity for us to engage in research and for us to do the work we needed to do in order to be successful. However, I did not realize graduate research assistants were available to us. So when I did my faculty package, I did not ask for it. I didn't know I could have one. No one told me I could ask for it, and no one offered it. So that was part of the thing that happened. The second thing that happened is the number of publications we had to produce were new to the faculty who were there, because everything that was starting was new. And the faculty who had accomplished tenure had done so through other means, writing books, writing book chapters, peer-reviewed articles and journals. Yes, they did that, and they were successful with that, but they didn't have to produce the number we had to produce. So helping us navigate that was very challenging for them, and I personally found it difficult to be able to do that without help. The third is that my research agenda, and this was strictly on me, my research agenda combined 2 different disciplines, and no one else in my department were combining those 2 disciplines. So it was very difficult for them to help me. It doesn't mean that I believe no one cared. I was checked on all the time. People checked in to see how I was doing. What did I need? But when I presented what I need, it was very difficult for them to step up to the plate and help me. I did have 2 faculty members who helped me write my first article in a peer-reviewed journal. So that was there. But I had to go outside of that to find someone to help me merge the 2 disciplines in my research agenda. So what did I do? I became more proactive, and that's going to be part of what I talk about in the next part of this. And the other African American female faculty, we realized that we weren't getting the same support as other faculty. We didn't know if that was because they already had a network that we didn't have. We didn't know if we didn't have the support that they had because they were given an opportunity that we weren't. And that wasn't our first thought. We didn't even realize we weren't accomplishing the same things until the awards ceremony at the end of the academic year. And again, that is not to throw anybody under the bus. This is to say this was my reality. So I missed some opportunities. And what did we do? We decided to work together ourselves in order to help each other. So the impact of access to mentoring can be very different between academic leadership programs or spending extra effort, time, and energy or going at it alone. For me, it was not a loss because I met some great people and I was able to get some things done, even though I didn't get tenure. But it did cause me to do some reflection, to decide if tenure was something I really needed for the goals and aspirations I had in the academy. And if it was, then I had to be intentional and proactive in making sure I got what I needed. That leads me to the third question, which is, what advice would you give to women who feel isolated in their academic journey and don't know where to go to find a mentor? So I have 3 approaches I would recommend, or 3 pieces of advice I would give. 1, be proactive. If you are already feeling isolated, that means your help is not coming. Superman, as the documentary says, is not coming. So you're going to have to do this yourself. And what do I mean by that is you're going to have to decide 2 things. Number 1, what is it you need a mentor to do for you? For me, I needed someone to help me make sense of how to move my research agenda forward. I didn't need teaching support, even though it would have been helpful, absolutely. But it wasn't my downfall. It wasn't my Achilles heel. It wasn't my weakest link. I had published before, but nothing to the level that was being expected of me at this time. So I specifically needed someone to help me with my research agenda, how to make sense of merging 2 different disciplines, writing articles, identifying where to put them, and what are the best ways in order to make that happen. So be specific about what it is you need them to do. and then be proactive about who can help you. Now, when you do this, you can look inside your unit, you can look inside your department, you can look inside your functional area, but you don't have to. You can look outside of that. You can look at other institutions. You can look at other units on the campus. You can look for individuals at your professional organization. You can find help anywhere. What I do like about this piece of advice is the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity has a mentoring model that I believe could work for anybody. Even though it's designed for faculty, it can work for anyone because it puts you as the mentee at the center of the mentoring experience, allows you to identify multiple areas where you may need support, and then identify who you believe can help you in those areas. One of the biggest flaws in typical mentoring programs is that one person is expected to be all things to the mentee. That is unfair to both the mentor and the mentee, and it's unrealistic. So put yourself at the center. What is it you need? Be specific about that, and then go out and find people who can help you. When you reach out, let them know exactly what you're trying to accomplish, why you chose them, what is it about their work and their success that you admire and you want to learn from them. How frequently do you plan to meet? What is the best way to meet with them? If you have a mentor in a professional organization, are you going to have coffee, lunch, breakfast when you meet at those annual meetings? Are you going to expect, or would you like to have semester meetings? Then they can respond to you with what they can do. Yes, presidents, provosts, vice presidents are very busy, but they're busy with the work that's on their calendar. What you have to decide is, how do you become somebody on the calendar, okay? So be specific and share as much as possible, so when they agree to help you, which most of them are willing to do, when they agree to help you, they know what they're getting into and they know what they can actually offer. And the final piece of advice is be teachable. One of the most frustrating things about mentoring people is when they don't take your advice over and over again without explanation or coming to some understanding. If you believe that the advice a mentor is giving you does not align with the unique challenges that you're facing or caveats of your work that you're doing or where you're trying to go, then you owe them a conversation. You came to them. You asked for their help. Now take it. And if you're not going to take it, make sure that you have that conversation. What's even more important, if you find that the advice is always misaligned with your expectations or what you're trying to accomplish, then maybe this isn't the mentor you thought you needed. And there might be a need for them to mentor you in some different capacity, or that this is not a good mentoring relationship for you, but you can decide that, and your mentor can decide that with you. So what is the advice I would give? Be proactive, be specific, and be teachable. So ultimately, my advice is, after feeling isolated, take off that mantle of feeling left out and that this can't be done, and take ownership of developing the relationships you need to be mentored, being specific about what you need and approaching the people who you believe can help. So that wraps up this episode of the Journey Boldly podcast regarding mentoring African American women in higher education leadership. I hope you've gleaned some really good nuggets from this experience and that you will be able to use much of it as you journey boldly in your career. Again, if you have any questions that you would like addressed on this podcast, send them to Dr. Gwen at journeyboldlypodcast.com. Or you can go to our website, which is www.journeyboldlypodcast.com, and you can submit your question that way by clicking on the link to the Journey Boldly podcast. Thank you again, and have a lovely week.